I told her, "Get your things and leave my house." But when the officer opened the suitcase, it wasn't clothes he found inside. It was 40 years of my life. The sentence hangs in the air of my little reading nook, settling around me like the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. I am Eliza, and I am 75 years old. If you'd asked me last winter, I would have told you that the hardest thing I'd done in decades was learning how to properly set up a smart television. Now I know better. The hardest thing I've ever done was reclaiming my own name inside my own walls. This house sits tucked into the foothills outside Stowe, Vermont. It's a sturdy clapboard structure, painted the color of dried sage, with deep porches that smell perpetually of pine and rain. My late husband Thomas and I built it stone by stone, plank by plank. We raised our son David here, in a home where the silence was a comfort, not a curse, and where the most dramatic sound was the crackle of the fireplace. That peace, that hard-earned quiet, was shattered 10 months ago when David and his wife, Serena, needed a place to stay. Their apartment complex, a new, flimsy thing down in Burlington, had suffered a burst pipe, leaving them without a lease or a ceiling. Just for a few months. "Mom," David had pleaded over the phone, his voice tight with that familiar boyish anxiety. "While the insurance gets sorted out. We'll be ghosts, I promise." Of course I said yes. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We are the foundation, the last resort. We open the door, and with it we open ourselves up to whatever storm our children carry. But I didn't realize that in opening the door for David, I was letting in a kind of weather I was wholly unprepared for. A cold, sharp front that would freeze the laughter right out of the floorboards. At first, Serena was polite, almost excessively so. She brought me a tiny, perfect orchid that died within a week, and she insisted on doing the dinner dishes, scrubbing them with such intensity that I suspected she was scrubbing away the ghost of my own cooking. I remember thinking, she's trying. She's just navigating a difficult time. But somewhere around the 4-week mark, a curious change came over her. The polite mask didn't slip. It vanished entirely, replaced by a strange, quiet proprietorship. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was subtle, like the slow creep of mold behind the drywall. The first sign was the silver serving spoon. It wasn't a family heirloom, just a heavy, sterling silver spoon Thomas had given me on our 10th anniversary. I used it every Sunday to dish out the mashed potatoes. One Monday, it was gone. I searched the drawers, the dishwasher, the drain, everywhere. "Serena, darling, have you seen the large silver serving spoon?" I asked her one afternoon, finding her scrolling through her phone, draped across Thomas's favorite antique chaise lounge. She barely looked up. "Oh, that ugly old thing? I probably threw it out. It was all tarnished. You should really upgrade your kitchenware, Eliza. It's giving dusty attic." "It was sterling silver, dear," I corrected, my voice calm, but my stomach nodding. "It wasn't tarnish. It was patina. Patina, tarnish, same difference," she shrugged, returning to her phone. It clashed with the minimalist aesthetic I'm trying to bring into the common areas. The spoon wasn't worth a fortune. But the dismissal, the sheer audacity of throwing out a piece of my property and then criticizing the rest of it, that was priceless. That was a warning shot I foolishly ignored, telling myself, she's young. They don't understand things that last. But Serena didn't just target the small things. She targeted the very spirit of the house. Our main living room was anchored by a magnificent, hand-stitched Flemish tapestry that Thomas's grandmother had brought over from Belgium. It depicted a quiet forest scene, deep with mossy greens and faded golds. It was a window into history. I came home one Tuesday from my bridge club to find the wall bare. The tapestry was gone. In its place hung a single stark white canvas, bisected by a sharp black line. Serena was perched nearby, sipping green tea. "I took it down, Eliza," she announced brightly. It was suffocating the energy. The piece was too busy for the new feng shui I'm implementing. The new piece, this one, she gestured to the stark canvas. It brings negative space and flow. I donated the old one to a textile reclamation center. They were happy to have it. I felt the blood drain from my face. Donated? Without asking? My hands, usually steady, started to tremble. I was standing in my own living room, yet the air felt foreign, the silence accusatory. "That tapestry," I said, my voice low and brittle, "was an antique. It was irreplaceable. It was given to my husband's family generations ago. Serena sighed, a heavy theatrical expulsion of breath, the kind that conveys one is dealing with an exhausting child. Oh, the stories people tell about their old stuff. It was faded, Eliza. It was making the room look old-fashioned. Old-fashioned. That word, like a poison dart, was her favorite weapon. She used it to dismiss my memories, my style, and ultimately, my authority. The psychological campaign continued into the kitchen, the very heart of the home. As winter approached in Vermont, I always undertook my annual ritual, stocking the cellar with provisions. Jars of pickled relish, canned tomatoes, and preserved peaches, neatly labeled and stacked, a habit born from a deep respect for harsh New England winters and a lingering Depression-era frugality. Serena, a strict vegan and proponent of clean eating, saw this as an insult to her lifestyle. One cold morning, I went down to the cellar to retrieve a jar of my homemade apple butter. The shelves were half empty. Jars were missing. I found a large industrial-sized blue recycling bin outside, overflowing. "What is this, Serena?" I demanded, holding up a jar of perfect, ruby-red canned beets that were now slated for the landfill. "That's my purge, Eliza," she said, without irony. "All that processed food, the sugar, the salt, the BPA from the lids, it's toxic energy. I replaced it all with organic flax seeds and nutrient powder. We can't have David eating that garbage anymore. I told him this house needs a detox. This house is preparing for snow," I exclaimed, my voice finally cracking with indignation. "This is not about detox, Serena. This is food security. This is my food. You threw out hundreds of dollars of work." David, who had grown increasingly silent and withdrawn since the move, finally piped up from the doorway, his eyes darting nervously between us. "Mom, she's just trying to help us be healthier. It's really good for your heart, you know? Less sodium." I stared at my son, the boy I had lovingly taught to chop firewood and identify constellations. Now he was a hollow shell, incapable of defending his own mother against a woman who was systematically erasing her existence. "He's gone," I thought. "She's already taken him." The constant, silent disrespect began to eat away at me. I started spending most of my days in my bedroom, emerging only to eat small, solitary meals. The house, once my sanctuary, had become a prison. Then came the violation that truly broke me. Out in the front yard, near the old stone well, stood a massive, sprawling lilac tree. I had planted it 50 years ago, the day David was born. It was messy, its blooms were past their prime, and it dropped leaves constantly, but it was magnificent. Every spring it exploded in a cloud of purple and white, filling the mountain air with its unmistakable, intoxicating scent. It was my memorial to David's infancy and Thomas's young fatherhood. One Saturday morning, I was woken by a horrific high-pitched whine. I rushed to the window and saw a sight that turned my blood to ice. Serena was supervising 2 young men with chainsaws. The air was thick with sawdust. The lilac tree was already half gone, its thick, ancient branches lying on the frozen ground like dismembered limbs. I threw open the window. "What in God's name are you doing, Serena?" She looked up, a bright, manic smile plastered across her face. "Morning, Eliza." "We're getting rid of the clutter!" David and I decided this area needed more sun exposure for my new outdoor yoga platform. That old thing was just blocking the light. It's all about creating an energetic flow, you know? Plus, the wood will be perfect for a new fire pit. The tears came then, hot and stinging, not from sorrow, but from a rage so deep it felt like a physical tearing of my soul. I didn't scream. I just stood there, watching the 2 men finish their destructive work, the smell of lilac and burning oil mixing bitterly in the cold air. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since I was a girl. I went into the woodshed, pulled out Thomas's old leather-bound journal, and reread the entry from the day David was born. He had written about planting the tiny lilac sapling, hoping it would be as strong and fragrant as his mother. This is no longer a temporary stay, I realized, gripping the journal until my knuckles went white. This is an invasion, a hostile takeover of my life, my memories, and my history. I couldn't sleep. The silence of the house, now missing the familiar groan of the old lilac against the porch railing, felt like a judgment. I knew I couldn't simply ask them to leave again. They had already proven they would not respect my words. I needed proof. I needed to catch her in an act so egregious, so undeniable, that even David couldn't defend her. I began observing her. I learned her routines, her morning meditation, her long work calls, her 3 daily trips to the mailbox. I became a ghost in my own home, gliding from room to room, watching. I was 75, but I moved with the cunning of a cornered animal. The bronze clock on the mantelpiece, a small, heavy piece shaped like an owl, given to Thomas by his father, had always been my silent guardian. I often dusted it, noting its cold, metallic weight. 2 days after the Lilac massacre, I was sitting on the stairs, pretending to read, when I saw Serena in the living room. She was wearing thin, disposable gloves. She wasn't dusting. She had wrapped the bronze owl clock in bubble wrap, placed it inside a small, unmarked box, and was affixing a shipping label to the top. I walked into the room, my slippers silent on the carpet. "Planning a trip, Serena?" She flinched violently, dropping the box. The sound of the clock hitting the hardwood floor was a dull, sickening thud. She recovered quickly, her expression instantly shifting to that practiced, condescending innocence. "Eliza, you scared me half to death." No trip. I was just doing an inventory." She laughed. A brittle, high sound. "This old clock is quite valuable, you know. I was just preparing it for the insurance company. They require evaluation and careful packaging for all high-value items, darling." I was just being proactive. I didn't believe her for a second. The shipping label, which was now lying face up, had a receiver address in Miami and a declared value that was shockingly low. She wasn't valuing it for insurance. She was liquidating it. She was selling my possessions one by one, claiming they were tarnished or clutter. The silver serving spoon, the tapestry, and now the owl clock. She was funding their new life with the bones of mine. "The insurance company," I repeated, walking over and picking up the label. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her, my eyes flat and cold. "The one with the Miami address. And the declared value of $50 for a piece worth $5,000. Her face finally, thankfully, lost its composure. The color drained away, leaving her pale and sickly. You were spying on me." "No, Serena," I said, dropping the label onto the floor. "I was living in my house. You were robbing me in it. That clock belongs to David's family. And you are selling it." She lunged toward me, not to strike, but to grab the clock box. "It's chipped. It's ugly. It's mine now. This whole house is suffocating us, Eliza. You live in the past. It's time for new money, new memories. Get your things," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical rant like an ice pick. "And get out of my house, now." The silence that followed was absolute. David, who had been on a call in the den, appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Serena pointed a trembling finger at me. "You heard her, David. She's hysterical. She's having one of her episodes. She's kicking us out right before the big snow. Tell her she can't do this." David looked at me, then at the bubble-wrapped clock, then at Serena's accusatory face. He looked like a man drowning, caught between the siren and the shore. "Mom, please," David pleaded, the weakness in his voice an insult in itself. "Just calm down. We can talk about the clock later. Serena was stealing from me, David," I finished. "She cut down the lilac tree you played beneath as a boy. She threw away your grandfather's wedding anniversary spoon. She has been systematically erasing me from my own home. And you stood by and watched." He didn't have an answer. The shame was a visible, toxic cloud around him. He turned to his wife, but Serena was already storming past me, her heavy footsteps thundering up the stairs. "Fine," she shrieked from the landing. "You want me out? I'll go. But you're coming with me, old woman." I heard the drawers slamming, the hangers tearing from the rods. For a moment I thought she was gathering her own belongings. Then I heard her tear into my cedar closet. David stood there, his body tensing, his fists clenching. He was still caught in the middle. "Mom, don't escalate this. She's upset. Let her pack." I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I saw the man he had become, weak, manipulated, and hostile. That's when he made his move, a terrible, visceral echo of the original script. He grabbed the nearest antique chair, a fragile piece from the dining room, and lifted it off the floor, holding it high, not to strike, but to dominate. "Don't talk to her like that," he bellowed, his face a grotesque mask of fury and humiliation. She's my wife, Mom. You will respect her. My heart hammered against my ribs, an animal trapped in a cage. But the fear, the old familiar maternal fear, lasted only a fraction of a second. It was immediately replaced by a cold, hard clarity I hadn't known I possessed. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I looked past the stranger holding the chair, searching for the boy I loved. "Go ahead, David," I said, my voice a steady whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shout. "Hit me. But before you do, remember who paid for the roof over your head, who signed the papers for your first mortgage, and who, just this morning, was going to let you stay here and weather the storm you made with her." His arms trembled. The chair wavered, dipping and shaking, reflecting the conflict raging inside him. I saw a flash of the boy, the regret, the horror, break through the anger. He lowered the chair, not dropping it, but setting it down with a loud wooden thud. She's stressed, Mom," he whispered, defeated. "Stressed people don't try to sell their mother's last ties to her late husband. David, they certainly don't cut down 50-year-old trees for yoga." I didn't wait for him to respond. I walked straight past him, my back ramrod straight, and went to the kitchen counter. I picked up the phone. "You have 1 hour to pack and be gone," I said, dialing 3 numbers. "After that, I call the police." He swore under his breath. Serena's frantic packing upstairs intensified. But I didn't hang up. I finished dialing. "Yes," I said into the receiver, my voice steady as the granite countertop beneath my hand. "I need to report a domestic threat and property theft at my address. My adult son and his wife are guests who refuse to leave. The threat has passed, but I need them removed immediately." Serena rushed down the stairs, her face frantic. "You didn't. You can't call the police. We're family. He didn't touch you." "He raised a weapon," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "And you tried to steal from me." "It's enough." The next 15 minutes were agonizing. David sat on the couch, head in his hands. Serena alternately paced and pleaded, insisting I was an unstable old woman. I stood by the window, watching the distant road, waiting for the red and blue flash of justice. When the 2 state troopers arrived, they were calm, professional, and entirely focused on the facts. They took my statement first, noting the address, my ownership, and the fact that David and Serena were guests. The moment I stated, "They are threatening me and trying to dispose of my personal property," the tone shifted irrevocably. "Ma'am, you are the homeowner. If you request that they leave, they must comply," the older trooper stated, his voice final. David stood up, tears welling in his eyes. "Mom, please. We have nowhere to go. It's going to snow." "You should have thought of that when you raised the chair," I said, my heart breaking for the ghost of the son I had lost. "You lost your right to stay here when you lost your respect for me." The troopers gave Serena and David 20 minutes to pack. I retired to the kitchen, refusing to watch the ignominy of their departure. I heard the frantic zipping of suitcases, the muffled, harsh words, and David's weak protestations. Finally, the troopers escorted them down the porch steps. As David ducked his head into the car, Serena, standing defiant by the open trunk, turned back and looked straight at me. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked defeated, but with a strange, venomous satisfaction. "You think you won, Eliza?" she called out, her voice hard. "You think you got rid of the problem? You haven't even seen what I packed yet, you old fool." The older trooper, sensing the drama, calmly approached the trunk. "Ma'am, I need to confirm you are taking only your personal belongings." Serena stepped aside, a small, twisted smile playing on her lips. "Go ahead. Look." The officer unzipped one of the large black suitcases. It wasn't full of clothes or shoes. It was meticulously and tightly packed with memory boxes. The first one, a carved wooden chest, held Thomas's military letters from Vietnam. The next was a collection of David's baby journals, the ones I had filled with his first words and drawings. Underneath those, bundled carefully in one of my silk scarves, were my marriage certificate, the deed to the house, and Thomas's will and insurance papers. The officer looked up, his professional facade briefly cracking. He was holding the paperwork that was the legal foundation of my life. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Serena, "these appear to be personal documents and property belonging to the homeowner. You cannot take these. Serena just stood there, arms crossed, the vile satisfaction in her eyes unmistakable. She hadn't packed my clothes to humiliate me. She had packed my memories and my legal security to hold me hostage, to force me to call her, beg her, or chase her. This was the ultimate violation, stealing the intangible, the irreplaceable. I walked down the steps, my knees weak, and looked directly into the suitcase. I saw the familiar scrawl of Thomas's handwriting on the letters. I saw the faded picture of my mother tucked into the baby journal. "That's enough," I said quietly. "Serena, take your clothes and your husband and leave my memories here." The troopers compelled her to unpack the stolen documents and leave them on the porch. The sheer calculation, the cold-blooded intent of that act was the final clean cut that severed my last thread of compassion for her. She had tried to steal my life's paper trail, ensuring that even after they were gone, the chaos would continue. They left 10 minutes later, the tires of their car crunching on the gravel driveway until the sound faded completely into the deep, echoing silence of the Vermont night. I didn't go back inside immediately. I stood on the porch, surrounded by the remnants of my life, the documents, the letters, the fragile wooden boxes. I gathered them into my arms, feeling the weight of 4 decades of love and struggle pressing against my chest. When I finally stepped back into the living room, the quiet was monumental. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I remembered. It was heavy, wounded, smelling faintly of sawdust and fear. I looked at the empty space where the lilac tree had stood, the stark white painting where the tapestry had been, and the bare patch on the mantel where the bronze owl had sat. I sank onto the chaise lounge, pulling Thomas's journal close. The house was a mess. My heart was broken, but the air was clean. The invader was gone. Over the next few weeks, I began the long, slow work of rebuilding. I hired a logger to grind the lilac stump down and planned to plant a new maple sapling in its place. I scrubbed the kitchen, throwing out all the flax seeds and nutrient powders. I even found a woman who specializes in textile restoration to hunt for a similar Flemish tapestry. The house began to breathe again. The peace that returned wasn't sudden. It was a slow, deliberate bloom. It felt like walking after a long illness, wobbly at first, then steady, then strong. I realized that the fight hadn't been about a chair or a mug or a tree. It had been about dignity. It had been about protecting the sacred right to define one's own space and one's own memories. 3 weeks later, David called. His voice was small, choked, and entirely genuine. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm staying with a friend. Serena and I were talking to lawyers. She was using me, Mom. The credit card bills, the sales. I saw the receipt for the owl clock. I saw the packing list. I'm so sorry. I didn't know who I was anymore." I listened, my hand resting on the receiver. I didn't rush to comfort him or rush to forgive. "David," I said finally, my voice calm, "I forgive the boy I raised. The man who raised a chair at me, I can't yet. But you will always be my son. You will always be welcome in my heart. But this house," I paused, looking out at the new maple sapling I had bought, sitting ready in its bucket. "This house is earned, not given. And respect, my dear, is the price of the key." He wept then, a sound I hadn't heard since he was a child. He didn't ask to come home. He only asked if I was safe, and that was the difference. That was the breakthrough. He finally saw me, not just his mother, but the woman who owned the foundation upon which he had stood. I hung up, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. I had spent so many years believing that love meant endless tolerance, that a mother's job was to endure. But Thomas's journal was safe, my deed was safe, and the lilac's memory was safe. I had fought a silent psychological war, and I had won back my own peace. Before I leave you with your thoughts, I want you to remember this. Home is where your peace is anchored. If you are standing in a place that has been invaded by disrespect, you must be the one to raise the line. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where your favorite piece of family history is kept. It warms this old heart to know where my words travel, and it reminds me that every quiet home has a story that needed to be fiercely defended.